Okay, so welcome back. We have some important material to discuss today related to agent-based modeling, and as time allows, the comparison further of agent-based modeling so that it's an individual-based lens as contraposed with an aggregate stock flow lens. So to that end, we're going to switch over to slides here, and I'll just make sure anyone viewing this through the recording has a chance to see these as well. Okay, so for the past several lectures, we've been dealing with agent-based models. Wade, a couple lectures ago, gave a brief overview, supplementing material you had watched online on characterization of agent state. And I want to remind people what we're dealing with here with the primary mechanism for characterizing discrete state which is divided into a set of specific possibilities. We make use of state charts as a key mechanism. I will note that not long ago, agent-based modeling packages didn't have an abstraction of state charts, and the code to implement the logic of state charts was often written hand-coded from top to bottom. And as you might imagine, a lot of the time, the underlying logic can be much more clearly, transparently, expressively, modifiably characterized by explicitly reifying, by characterizing as an abstraction a state chart, characterizing states, characterizing the transitions between those states, the conditions under which those transitions take place. To do that as hand-coded logic written from scratch is inviting obscurity, bugs, longer times to debug those quantities, so slower iteration cycles, and an increasingly large code base that is hard to understand. It's particularly a barrier if in the light of the current reality that effective modeling teams, impactful modeling projects, inevitably involve interdisciplinary stakeholders. They involve gathering understanding from people from many different domains. And a construct like a state chart, like in turn a stock and flow model, can invite feedback, can invite commentary, can invite challenge, can invite criticism, and thereby allow for refinement. Remember, modeling is about learning. And if our representation is at variance with scientific understanding as understood by stakeholders within our team, we want to get that criticism so we can refine our understanding. We want to learn. If through contact with the model, either by looking at the state charts or the dynamics from the model, a stakeholder says that doesn't line up with my experience, I think this is more likely, or I think this would be a better, your state chart needs to be modified to include X, Y, or Z. That's not a failure of a model. It's a success of modeling the process that we're able to bring that knowledge out. Because that knowledge was there before the modeling project and that stakeholders and the stakeholders had. We just didn't elicit it. We didn't learn about it until we have a model to put in front of them. So it's by putting something concrete in front of people that often you draw that criticism out. And while it makes us sometimes feel vulnerable, it's extraordinarily powerful for helping us learn by drawing out understanding that wouldn't have been brought forward. So that's just a little bit about the human theater of modeling. But today's lecture is really talking about these technical constructs and what they express at a mathematical level and how they compare state charts on the one hand, stock and flow models. So Wade introduced you, building again on that, on the video you had seen earlier, to the fact that within state charts, in contrast to stock and flow modeling, we have many types of transitions. In stock and flow modeling, we have a very powerful single way of characterizing transitions, namely with flows. And the formula for the rate of those flows, how many, say, people per day go down a certain flow, is given by the state of the model. But we don't have multiple types of flows, like discrete flows or flows that are that have exactly fixed times before someone transitions. It's all ultimately boils down to certain formulas being computed for a flow that debits those from the upstream stock and flows to the downstream. Here, by contrast, in a state chart, we have multiple types of transitions, right? And the very fact of that is shown by the iconography here. We have timeout transitions, we have rate transitions, which have a lot of common similarity to stock and flow transitions, but bearing in mind that stock and flows are not always per person, say, in the upstream stock. And then we have message-based transitions. Message-based transitions reflect interactions between agents, right? Or between an agent and an environment, for example. It's a way of asynchronously, without the agents being in lockstep, having one, say, agent influencing another. I send you a message. That message may abstract from me exposing me to pathogen. It may reflect me passing on a rumor. It may reflect me giving you an idea for an innovation, inspiring you with an idea for an innovation, right? Whatever it represents, it's a mode of interaction. And as discussed then, there are really 5 or 6, depending on how you slice and dice them, types of transitions. Timeout transitions, rate transitions that can be fixed rate, a given rate, a constant and invariant over time rate, or it can be variable, some rate that changes over time, maybe in some pre-specified way, or maybe based on other things in the model. So that would be a rate transition that might be changing in its value as I age or as I evolve my risk behavior or what have you. There's these message transitions, conditional transitions, which I've termed predicate transitions, and an arrival transition for agents moving around. And these transitions can be conditionally routed via branches. And branches, I believe you've seen them in a number of models. I'm not going to elaborate much, but they allow, as we move instantaneously between the states. I say instantaneously because the time between when an agent leaves one state and when they arrive at the destination state is 0 time, right? They're not spending time in these pipes, so to speak. They're not waylaid in these transitions. It's conceptually when they leave and when they're routed to their next destination, as far as the state is concerned, there's 0 time elapsed. Of course, they spend time in the states, but that's just the point. They don't spend time outside the states. The states are where the states are the states, like the state of their situation. However, between these states, we can have, for example, branches, like whether or not, given encountering a pathogen, they're infected or not. And if they did encounter the pathogen, whether they, in this case for TB, they develop TB more or less immediately, active TB, or they get latently infected for potentially decades. So we can have these sort of branch-based transitions. I would note that the predicate transition, the conditional transition, is shown here. If you wish to have something going on while staying in a state, the way of doing it in any logic is to have a transition within the state, going from the state to itself, but staying within the boundaries of the state visually. A transition like this will lead them to leave the state and come back into it. And that's important if there's entry actions here. If there's things to be done when they enter a state, this will actually leave the state and come back in. Whereas you can actually have a transition inside of that state visually. Going from that state to itself, it'll just stretch from this side to this side, which will lead to them remaining in that state. But something happens, say, periodically. Okay. Right. I would note that for branch transitions, there's both default and conditional transitions, etc. There's a special state chart that, at least until recent versions of AnyLogic, there's some question about whether AnyLogic, if it's changed its support, this could be shared in earlier versions between two or more state charts. So you could have an exit transition. This typically represents something like death, or an agent ceases its behavior. So multiple state charts used to be able to come to focus on a given death transition. I'm not sure if that's still the case. This, incidentally, is a default transition, the dotted line there. Now, something I want to discuss today that Wade did not talk about, and that I think was only glancingly mentioned in the video, which folks watched earlier, is the fact that within state charts, we can depict hierarchical structure. This says hierarchical states. Really, it should say compound states. It's true that it's a hierarchical state chart. It has multiple levels, one level inside, nested inside another. But this is a compound state, this one down here. And what distinguishes it as a compound state is it is a state. Inside is a state. But within the inside, there are several distinctions further made. And in fact, there can be dynamics between them. So this is with respect to their status in the healthcare system, whether they're currently kind of within a some sort of persistent relationship with the healthcare system. Either they can be outside of it, or they can have a persistent relationship. Outside might be, just on an episodic basis. If they're feeling really, really sick, they go to emergency room or urgent care. Inside would be like they have an ongoing relationship with a physician, or they're being followed as part of a rehab program or what have you. So here, the idea is that we've distinguished several different levels of care, all of which qualify for being inside. And if there's a transition into the state, there's a designated entry point within the compound transition. And you'll notice, and this is quite important, that there can be transitions that leave the compound state and go outside. And what's important to realize is that these transitions can either come from these internal states, or they can come from this overall compound state and leave. So if a transition came, and I really should have a depiction of that, and I think I do, so I hope you'll forgive me for showing it later. This is an example of a model built by one team many moons ago for this class of chronic wasting disease. And you'll notice that we have these compound states for like the life of a fawn. This is not about the afternoon of a fawn by Faure. This is about the life of a deer, a cervid, and particularly white-tailed deer. So here in the life cycle of a deer, there's fawnhood, and then there's adulthood, and adulthood can involve a number of years of life. What's notable here that I want to draw your attention is that there are transitions not only from these internal states of the compound state, that should be a familiar idea. You can have transitions from one state to another, but there can be transitions from the compound state as a whole to other states. And what that means, the semantics associated with this, is that there is such a transition from any of the substates. So having a transition from the compound state is equivalent to having that same transition for each of the substates. It's just cleaner visually. I think you'd agree. I could go duplicate this transition predation for 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 plus. But that would be obscurant. It would potentially obscure the logic. It would just be so much welter of detail. It would obscure the essential fact, the core fact, that the same transition applies for any state. That's something you want to communicate, right? That for any of these states, they're subject to predation. And actually, it may seem the more times you duplicate that, the more clear that is, but it's not the case. You want to hear the fact that it's coming from the compound state makes it very clear. Any state within that is subject to predation. If you add a state in the future, it's subject to predation. If you have to add one from each of these states, you lose track of that. And you might not be able to glance at it and see that it applies to all of them. So the fact that we capture these abstractions happen. It matters in software engineering, it matters in model. To be clear about our assumptions, to be clear about the structure, to be clear about the dependency, and to be clear to those looking over the artifact, whether it's ourselves looking over code and software project, or stakeholders, or ourselves as modelers looking over elements. So if it communicates nothing else, I hope this, this glance at this particular model, this particular agent here, and seeing the logic of the state charts communicates to you that compound states and the hierarchical state charts that include them are powerful. They can allow you to group things, sort of classes of things that are in common, like infectious states versus non-infectious states, adulthood versus juvenile status, and in fact types of behaviors like random movement for eating and drinking of a deer in the landscape versus movement as a fawn versus social movement and movement during the season called rut, with which some of you may be familiar. And once again, we can capture with these abstractions, common things that, for example, certain behaviors like going and getting water when an agent is thirsty apply despite any of these overall behaviors. Okay, so state charts can pack a lot. I want to talk a little bit about the mathematics of this, and I want to relate it to what we see with stock and flow modeling. Okay, so I'm going to, at the cost of sort of whiplash, I'm going to go back and to this, to the slides we were starting to go through. Okay, so let me go back to the beginning of this, and we will just continue on there. Okay. One thing I want to emphasize, which was present in that very example too, but which is shown here perhaps more directly, or in this one with different colors, is that we can have multiple state charts side by side for a given agent. Hmm? Multiple state charts like these. Hmm? And by default, each of these state charts evolves independently. There may be some interactions. We can couple aspects of them through messages by having one set a variable that is used as a rate for another, for example. Setting conditions, setting values that are used in conditions for another. But there's a notion of parallel characterization. And I want to talk about the mathematics of this, so we really understand what we're talking about. But first, I just want to remind us that a person characterized by will be in, by default, a single basic state for each of these state charts. I say basic because they could be in simultaneously in a state inside a compound state inside a bigger state. When I say a simple state, I'm talking about a specific state. That may be in kind of some nested compound state. But they're going to be in a single state, for example, with respect to this nephropathy state chart, so kidney related functions. With respect to this coronary heart disease state chart, with respect to eye disease, that might be caused by diabetes, and with respect to diabetes. So they're in at any one point a certain state here. That's not to say that these are statistically no. I mean, based on the drivers going on here, maybe when someone develops diabetes, their chance of progressing along this becomes much higher. It may be that we have certain types of medications like insulin use or metformin use that slow down progression, and by implication will therefore slow down progression along these. But the point is, at any one time, a person here, and this agent will be in a single state with respect to Comfortable with that? So T one. Okay, hearing no objections, I'm going to continue on to talk about some of the implications of that. Okay. Right. Okay. So what I wanted to actually discuss, and I'm for some reason I'm not at the right slide here, so give me a second here. Yes, it's this. For some reason it's rather later. So when we have these state charts, there's an underlying concept that is important to understand. And I'm going to try to prompt you with this mathematics. So to just reason through implications, and we're going to put it side by side with some aspects of stochastic modeling. So suppose we were to have two state charts side by side. Maybe one deals with states associated with some communicable disease, like SIR. Just keep it simple. And maybe another one deals with some condition like diabetes, which this is rather unhelpful, which is going to be treated here as dichotomous in one way. Maybe we'll Go back. So can people tell me from these state charts, these two state charts for a given age, how many total states can they be? If we were to enumerate the possible states they could be in, the distinct situations they can be in, if this is the entire description, how many total states are there? Yes, so okay, this is not good. 8, yes,
There are 6.
there are 6 states indeed. And once that number comes, do you want to give a hint how you derive that correctly?
Yeah, you use pretty much for each state that's on the
Yep.
you multiply by each state.
Bingo, bingo. So there are 6 states. There's basically every combination of these states for on the left and these states to the right, right? A person could be in any one of these and any one of these at a time. Could we imagine creating a single state chart that packs all of that information? What would it look like? Beyond being, if I dare say so, might say so myself, rather hideous. What would it look like? A single state chart to rule them all. Well, to be more embarrassing than them all. What would it look like? What would be the entry states? What would be the entry state for it? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's what's that? Did someone volunteer something? Susceptible non-diabetic, right? And where could they go? So I should have, I'm trying to capture this. My main computer has encountered severe silicon dysfunction this morning, actually last night. And it spent the night in the sick room and has not recovered. And I had to go home and take that apart. For all its internals and press in various connectors and so on. It's like it's thrown interrupt requests. Anyway, that's an aside. Okay, so we start in this state. Why is it this state? Because we start, well, everyone starts susceptible and everyone starts non-diabetic, right? That's the bar. Yes, folks may be innocent of that notation, but that means not. Not. Are you familiar with that, or are you not familiar with? You familiar with not, or are you not familiar? Okay. I think you're familiar with not. Okay. From there, where could someone go? Yes, Ikshina. Good. They could go to infectious non-diabetic, right? They could also go to susceptible diabetic.
It's probably not like that, infectious and diabetic.
At the exact same time. So we'll treat it as like the chance is so vanishingly small, given this isn't continuous time, that they like somehow get infected and become diabetic at that exact instant. We'll treat one as having these possibilities. Okay, so that's good. Where could they go from infectious non-diabetic? So if they're infectious non-diabetic, where else could they go? Alex. Yeah.
Go to recovered non-diabetic or active diabetic?
Good. It could go to recovered non-diabetic. Or they could go to infected diabetic, right? Which I, with malice aforethought, will write over here. Okay, that's good. So each of those, so there's a method to this madness, right? Each of these is associated, like from infected non-diabetic to recovered non-diabetic. What you're basically taking into account is this transition, right? But leaving unchanged the diabetes status. This transition, excuse me, this should have been diabetic, right? Diabetic. You're having diabetes progression. How about this one, SD up here? This one with someone who's susceptible and diabetic. Where could they go? Yes, Jihan. Infected diabetic, which we already have here as a state, right? And where else could they go? That's all, right? Because there's no, this is an entrapping state. There's no outflow. There's no out transition, right? Okay. Someone who's recovered non-diabetic, where could they go? So Eric, they could go back to susceptible non-diabetic. Where else is there someone else there they could go? Elliot. So recovered diabetic, that's right. I'm gonna put that here. Recovered diabetic. They could go there. Okay, so that's good. Right here, we don't have to. Right now, given there's only at most one transition out here of each state, one transition out here at most, we don't have to worry. If we've got two out, we know we've dealt with all the possibilities. Some might only require one, right? Like this one right here, because sorry, this one right here will only have one. Okay, so let's continue on with infectious diabetic. Where could that go next? So Prisha, to the recovered diabetic, right? Right? They're positioning out here. In recovered diabetic, is there anywhere else this could go? No, because there's no possible progression along there. And recovered diabetic, where could that go? So, Liam, susceptible diabetic. I love these things. This is like awesome stuff. Okay. This is not the awesome camera. Okay. Okay. We did we miss any? Yes, Mehdi. Susceptible diabetic could go out to infected, but sorry. Sorry. Thank you. Yes, this should have gone. What Mehdi was pointing out. Recovered diabetic should have gone on to susceptible diabetic, right? We go with that? Okay, how many states does this have? 6. Where did those come from? Well, Aiden said it first, right? It's all combinations, right? I think you can appreciate that the structure here reflects at some level this structure. But this is a factorization of this. This is sort of taken out what looks like a bunch of transitions without perhaps obvious structure here. And it's actually factorized it in a manner that is simpler. Simpler in terms of articulating the rules for the structure here in a simple way with 2 transitions on the left with this infectious disease. And 1 transition on the right. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a third back here, right? So here we have 5 states on the left in these 2 different state charts, 3 and 1, 2 and other. Here we have 6 states. On the right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think, transitions. Counter. On the left, by contrast, we have 4, right? And I think one thing you'll appreciate is what Pius. I think it was Pius. It was in the Pius zone, so it could have been Nicola. It was somewhere in this zone that there was an utterance made last time about combinatorial explosion. Oh, that was Akshina? Okay, well, she'll forgive me for saying it's in the Pius zone. It's also in the Akshina zone and the Nicola zone. Okay, there's a combinatorial explosion here, and here it's a modest thing, right? 5 versus 6 states. But if you added in even another state term of 2, right? This would go from 6 to how many? 12. This would be additive on the left, multiplicative on the right. What we see here is something that at a technical level is the product of these 2 state charts. Each of the state charts could be viewed as a sum. And there's a technical term for this coproduct that I'm not going to be expanding on. Excuse me. I wrote it with the wrong designations of states. And I wish there were a better way I could arrange this, but you're in either state S or state I or state R. You have a choice between one of these, kind of like with a set. If you say you draw a number from set or a value from set to set, S, I, and R, you get either S or I or R. And here we have 2 possibilities. And what we have is the product of them by putting them side by side. And what we get out, as you might expect, and I'm not going to write it in all of its fulsomeness, would be, the product of each of these pairs, right? You could just do it out. It's the old distributive law that you would have seen in other classes. Maybe I will write it out just for just a full characterization. All right. And there are your sets, right? It's coming from this product. There's an algebra. Within a state chart, we have choices of states. Between state charts, put parallel, we have products of possibility, right? So, choice of possibility, products of possibility. More than that, and perhaps to do justice, it's only fitting that I use this board to enfranchise other parts of the class. Okay. If we have a state chart here where we have a compound state, perhaps I will treat it as something like this. Eraser, such as it is. The eraser is subdivided into 2 components. One of them fit only for erasing, but not for grabbing. The other fit for grabbing and not erasing. But I will bend it to my will and erase with it with some displeasure. Okay, so here we have a hierarchical state chart. And I'm going to call this I'll call this maybe I'll just to distinguish with the names, something about the hierarchy. I'll call this BC and I'll call this entire state here, capital BC, but they like designation. So this can be expressed, this state chart is sum of possibilities, A plus BC, but BC is itself equal to, as a state chart, set of possible state to be a b little c. So this is actually fully A plus B plus C, right? Those are the sets of possibilities you can be in. Now, the key thing that I want to emphasize, though, if I have a transition out of BC, it's like having a transition from B plus C, one of these possibilities, and to A. And if you think about it, and Matthew and you, Chair, may find particular significance to this. You think about this, what information is needed to specify maps from either B to A or C to A. This is equivalent informationally to saying we have a map from B to A and a map from C to A. Another way to put it in terms of mathematics, we're going to talk about the mathematics of this, is that this is actually equivalent to B plus A to the B plus C power, where this is a product. Check that out, BJ. And that's equal to, does anyone want to factorize it? What is A to B plus C? Just
A to the B times A to C.
You got it. So this is a function from B to A. This is a function from C to A. So it's equivalent to one of those. So what I'm saying is the mathematics all work out beautifully with state charts if you consider it from this algebraic perspective. Like this description of a state chart is a sum of states, description of a compound state is a sum of its possibilities. Transitions out of a compound state are themselves crisp, expressive ways of characterizing transitions out of each substate without having to write it all out, but mathematically it's equivalent to having a transition out from each of the substates. Now, there's depth here that I'm not going into. There's a heck of a lot of depth. There's some really interesting stuff that comes in, for example, and the transitions into a compound state. But I think I'm going to leave it there. What I do want you to know, though, and I'm going to really hit on and emphasize now, is this issue that any parallel state charts, when you put state charts side by side, the implication is with the product of possibilities. Remember, I said that in one of my first comments about this, that you're in exactly one state with respect to this one at a time, and one state with respect at any one time, you're in one state here, one state there, right? One simple state. And I said simple because you might be in one of these, and yeah, you're in capital BC, you know, that state is as well as the compound state, but I'm talking the most simple sort of concrete state that at any one time you're in one of these and one of these, and that leads to a set of possibilities. But I want you to also be clear that this can be normalized. I say normalized in the sense of made canonically characterized as a product here. And that the larger the number of parallel state charts, I could show you pictures of our models that have 10 parallels or 12 parallels. The more we have, the more and more ungainly this product will be. And the more crisp, more and more parsimonious it is to specify each in parallel. Parceling each out, a separation of concerns, as we say in software engineering. We deal with infection issues, infection state chart, we deal with diabetes issues, the diabetes state chart. And we don't mix them all together. And by so doing, by parceling it out, you can make the logic of it clear. The logic here, the fact that any susceptible state over here on the right can transition to an infectious state, any recovered state can go back to susceptible, diabetes states only progress, that somehow gets lost. You can't see the forest for the trees here. You lose the essential structure. And what I'm saying is, it's in our purview as computer scientists to look for the right abstraction, to crisply describe things, to make them transparent. It's important for the human theater, it's important for reasoning, it's important for preventing bugs, it's important for clarity, it's important for debugging. It's important for work. And characterizing things here using state charts like this in parallel affords us that clarity that can be lost if we just glom things all together, put things in one area. Those invariants of the rule, the logic of the infection, the logic of diabetes is not obvious when we just have this welter of possibilities. Okay, so that's an important point, and I do want you to be able to take this and turn it into a normalized state chart. That's the sort of thing which is possible, for example. Okay. There's some nice distributive properties here. I will note. Yeah, I could go into this in more detail. But I think I'm going to move on to the discussion of how this relates to Stockton flows and so on. Okay. Right. So, what we want to do is to talk about stock and flow modeling side by side. So at some level, you might be tempted, and understandably so, to look at state charts on the one hand, here on the left, and stock and flow models on the right, and say, well, wait a minute. Potato, potato, tomato, tomato, basically the same thing, look susceptible, exposed, infectious, recovered. We call them flows on the right, we call them transitions on the left, really same thing. That's understandable. And it's also completely wrong. There are some threads of commonality. That's not to be denied. The structure of the graphs and so on are very similar. The fact that it captures the same underlying structure of the process is not an accident. And you're absolutely right that there's some similarity there. But to say that they're the same would be incorrect. To say they're just potato, potato, tomato, tomato, that they're just different names for the same things is incorrect. They are different, they are each powerful. They can be each insightful. But they are different in what they depict. And I want to quickly talk about that and emphasize this point. So within an aggregate stock flow model, I hope it's starting to be clear to you that, look, the organization of an aggregate stock flow model, the dividing up the model into its constituent parts, that we divide things into different stocks to characterize different states, right? Different characteristics. Gosh, if we had susceptible, folks in British Columbia, susceptible folks in Alberta, susceptible folks in Saskatchewan, we put them into different stocks, right? We divide up the model according to characteristics, and some of those, like the state, evolve over time, right? And each stock here counts in an aggregate model, counts the number of, in this case, people who are in that state, right? Count at any one time. Count of susceptible, count of exposed, right? If we froze the model, we run it, freeze at a certain time, that might be, 10,231 susceptible, 347 exposed, etc. Right? And so at any one time we have some count, but it's organized according to state or characteristics. Are we comfortable with that? Sort of that's the structure of the model. An agent-based model, the organization is very different, right? We divide it up, sort of the units of organization at runtime when we're running, simulating, are individual, right? Individual agent. And each agent keeps track of its evolving state, right? And there's the ability to summarize up to counts over the entire population. But each agent is characterizing its properties, its characteristics, its attributes, and its states, its current state, right? I will note that in an aggregate model, we don't have a really nice way of characterizing hierarchical structure. Like we don't have a way of here, traditional modeling like this, of having somehow some structure for Canada as a whole, and then a substructure within it for BC, for Alberta, for Saskatchewan, for Manitoba, etc. And within it, the different cities. Really, we could have a susceptible BC, susceptible Alberta, susceptible Saskatchewan, exposed BC, exposed Alberta, exposed Saskatchewan, etc. for Western provinces. But they'd all be kind of at the same level of the model. They're not nested in each other in any way. And if there was a total for Canada, we could total up across provinces the number of infectives, but there wouldn't be a hierarchical structure. By contrast, in an agent-based model, we can actually have hierarchy. I haven't emphasized this. I mean, we talked about it from stage chart, but what I'm talking about is actually a little bit different. We could have an agent for a city. You can have an agent for neighborhoods within that city. You can have agents for people, and have agents for schools, for example. And what levels you want to have, will differ. It has to do with your interventions and what structures you need to capture to characterize the dynamics. But the point is, we can actually have nesting within the model. Like agents live within families, live within neighborhoods, live within a city, and actually capture that nesting and have characterizations of statistics at different levels. Okay. Now, for both state charts and individual stock flows, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, here's a state chart, here's a stock flow. We are characterizing right here discrete states. Now, mind you, we said last time, you may remember, we said that we could have, for one of these traditions, which one is it? We could have individuals with continuous state or continuous problems, like age. That's conceptually a real number or non-negative real. Or we could have their viral load level, or we could have their level of immune strength with respect to a pathogen. Which tradition allows continuous attributes for people? Yes, it can. Asia-based. But both state charts and stocks and flows, as ways of capturing state, deal with discrete aspects of state, right? It's like susceptible, or infected, or recovered, right? And you can have that side. Out the number in each, and you can have it in state charts, right? States, yes. But unlike aggregate stock and flows, we have the ability here to have parallel characterizations of a given person for this state chart, that state chart, this other one, without dealing with a combinatorial explosion. But beyond that, we can keep track of how long an individual, for example, is in a state and have them chance of leaving, for example, or chance of something happening, depending on how long they've been. That's not possible. Let's be clear. In a stock and flow model, you cannot have here a transition out of, an infectious state where the probability of leaving depends how long you've been in that state. It's memoryless. Any one state is memoryless. Now, the whole thing is not memoryless, so you consider multiple states. So you can break up the infectives into infective sub 1, infective sub 2, infective sub 3, put them in a row, and that would capture, their first stage of infection, second stage. And that would be memory full. But any one state, you could have the chance of them leaving over time, like the rate at which they leave over time can differ. It can differ in how many people are how many physicians are on staff or whatever, but it cannot be that it keeps track of when this particular person entered. This is just a number. It doesn't keep track of for each person when they entered, right? In stock and flow, we will need to consider combinations. So I'm gonna show you this is stock and flow. Let's suppose we have COVID influenza. So we have stocks. Counts of people in each of these stocks. Top and counts of people in each of these stocks. Down the bottom, where again, this like I sub F is infectious for flu. I sub C is infectious for COVID, right? I think the idea is clear. Influenza people progress to on the bottom, COVID on top. So with this depiction, can we get a report at any one time if we run follow-up? So we stop it. Can we get a report of how many people there are with COVID at any one time? Yes. Yeah. Can we get a report how many people there are with flu at any one time? Yeah. Indeed. Can we get a report of how many people there are who of those with influenza who also are with flu? Yes, I put it there as flu. It is influenza. With influenza also have COVID version. No, they are depicted independent, right? They are depicted separate. If we wanted to capture that, this is what we need to do, right? We need to characterize this progression with COVID along here, the horizontal, and progression with flu vertical, right? Where would people, where's the stock for this? If we have the top is susceptible for COVID, susceptible for flu. As I go to the right along the top row, I get exposed for COVID and then but susceptible for flu. And then I have infected for COVID, infective for COVID, susceptible for flu, etc. And if I go down from the upper left, I go from susceptible for COVID, susceptible for flu to susceptible for COVID, infection or exposed for flu, etc. Where's the stock that keeps track of people who right now are both infected for COVID and infected for flu? Where is that? Yeah, this guy, yeah, right? It's in the column for infectious for COVID, and it's in the row for infectious for flu, right? Okay. Similarly, if we wanted, multiple routes of progression for coronary artery disease and diabetes, we have to deal with this full explosion. That's what we're dealing with. With stock and flow modeling at an aggregate level, we need to have all combination of possibilities. And that becomes burdensome. So I mentioned it last time, but I'm showing 4 examples. If you want this for a real model, or we might have, been asked in some of our work with the health authority to have models for RSV, so respiratory syncytial virus, influenza, and COVID simultaneously. Or you might look at gonorrhea, chlamydia, herpes, simplex virus, and hep C, or HPV virus. And there we could do it with 4 state charts. Within a person and their state each. Parcel it out, 4 state charts, factorized nicely. If we tried to do it with the stock and flow model, capture people with multiple of those conditions at the same time, that way lives matter. That's what quote Shakespeare in King. He wasn't probably talking about state terms, but the timeless words of the bard ring true. Okay. So if I'm to wrap this up, because wrap we must, let's talk about some basics here of individual based modeling. We can simultaneously track the state. This lecture is really kind of about state. Last time was about characteristics, right? Combinations of characteristics. This is about state. We can track simultaneously the state of individuals along multiple dimensions with multiple state charts in a parsimonious way, a way that allows factorizing what would be a dizzying set of combinations into a smaller number. And the more state charts we anchor in here, the more glaring the disparity will be between a fully normalized characterization, which combines them all, or a stock flow model, which combines them all, versus a state chart description. This matters for model transparency. It's important it's a key part of heterogeneity, but we also have static attributes that we talked about last time, where we also have combinatorial. And we can capture memory-full transitions. By memory-full transitions, I've talked about transitions that do depend on, for example, how long someone has been in a certain state. So I had mentioned 5 or 6, depending on the characterization, how you slice and dice it, different types of transitions here. Can you tell me which of those is memory-less transition of the 6 that I listed? You remember? Well, 4 state charts of the transition types for state chart. You're absolutely right, stock and flow. Absolutely memoryless for transition. I'm saying there is one type of transition for state charts that is memory. I don't think I emphasized this one. Now, which one is it? It's actually good. I welcome these thoughts. Sorry. The fixed rate transition is memory. No matter how long they've been there, it's the same. With a variable rate, you can, in fact, actually make the variable rate depend on how long they've been there. Not always, but only depends on the timeout is explicitly memory full. Like a rate transition, if you remember, has a rate. So I have a certain chance per unit time of leaving at any one time. It's always the same chance, right? Same kick of the can every day for leaving, right? That has. But so no matter how long you've been there, the chance of leaving per day. By contrast, a timeout transition, I have 0 chance of leaving before that. And then I will leave at that time. So it's like memory full in the strongest sense. It's like exactly memory full. It's remembering how long you've been there and having you leave after it. So we can actually express more with state chart transitions than we can with this sort of characterization of rememberless. But we sometimes make use of rememberless transitions in state charts. Just we have the option for more. We have the capacity. This is really important to accumulate. And for example, compare model results to history information on agents. We can actually keep track of an agent's health history or history of when they got diabetes, when they how many times they've been infected and at what time, and even from whom or where they were infected. These things can provide real insight into the dynamics of a model and help you reason about what's going on in the world. And finally, I'll emphasize this point that I did last time. And it was a good point made in a discussion with which Eric featured prominently as well. That there's a technical aspect to this that involves mathematics and the heinous growth of combinatorial explosions once you get multiple dimensions and heterogeneity. But at the end of the day, it's not so much that the running time of aggregate models becomes too slow. It's not so much that memory footprint becomes too large, because after all, they're actually very, very, very small memory footprints and running times compared to aggregate. It's really a matter of nimble evolution. It's a matter of clarity of the depiction. It's a matter of how cumbersome and how obscuring the representation is. And it's the ability to express it in a far more parsimonious form, of one that's factored neatly into its components, and that allows the model to learn, team to learn more effectively, and to evolve the model with greater clarity and nimbleness. That's the real strength here. And in these regards, individual-based modeling can shine. Those are all my comments for today. I hope you too have a day when